Wonderful day, wonderful day, wonderful day indeed. This is your neighborhood sensei Fouché, and I always begin my shows by first strongly suggesting, because a lot of folks don't like being told what to do, true indeed. So, moving forward in conversation, I most emphatically implore for all of you beautiful, wonderful, self loving, worthy individuals to stay woke. But in the process, never get all stressed out. You know what I'm saying? Make sure you take all necessary meditative practices and procedures, including environmental change, when and if necessary, to relax. And always, always, always be prepared to take those notes. And today is the 3rd of December, 2025. Here in the States of America, my location, it is 2:35 in the afternoon, or in 24-hour numeric, 14:35. That is the current time. And it's been a minute. We're in what we label the holiday seasons, which pretty much starts with Halloween, going into Thanksgiving, going into Christmas, into New Year's. And there's always so much going on. And really needing to decompress a little bit, be more assertive into my home life, and being able to have necessary conversations and organizing specific information in order to validate opinions or correct them, and being able to move forward. You know what I'm saying? And that's the process, for me. And I got to give a shout out right quick to Packboy Dolo. He was dropping his unlimited reset, and that is an awesome, awesome idea. And anybody that doesn't, that let me first drop his foundation on YouTube. Check out Round the Clock Thinkers, and it's hosted by Packboy Dolo, and he has what he calls this unlimited reset when it came to his situation, which I, as an elder of his, was speaking to him about in regards to addiction and overcoming addictions. You know what I'm saying? So shout out to Packboy Dolo. But when I talk about this process, it's being able to go through understanding and accepting a whole lot quicker in order to process forward and not stay stuck in time, be time trapped. And that was something we was talking about. I keep saying we, because, the way I'm going to speak is that we're in this together, and I'm starting to gain specific people. I'm not trying to attract, I'm not from the front end, like going for volume. You know what I'm saying? I am going for substance. And all of our chosen listeners are connected to the substance, and it's not about being, fun, and, I have my personality, and I know that attracts certain people, and thank you very much, but for me, it's mostly about the information and being able to connect with specific types of people in that help you absorb that information and make it easier in an explanation for you to be able to grasp a whole lot more clearer, and I know that's what we're in this together for. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah, I didn't want to go too much into this opening, other than the fact that, like I said, process is necessary, and I go through these processes myself in my life, and that's what I was focused on for a good minute. A lot of this is important, and you are all important as well, and I love doing this. And when I'm not able to, put my correct energy into it, it really bothers me. But I know I'd rather be right in order to do it right and explain it right, and have the most calm in my energy, and not be in a state of high anxiety, in order to break down and communicate the way I would like to, and be smooth, as I always say. You know what I'm saying? But in the meantime, I'm absorbing. I'm just soaking it all in and being ready for these moments. You know what I'm saying? And I really, and as you probably, anyone that's watching more than listening, we kind of shifted the scene a little bit. And reason being, I had to get a new setup, and I'm about to pop on some more light when I'm talking about it, because I totally forgot that this thing is not on. And I figured we had enough light, but we about to add on just for the sake of, boom, there we go. So we bright, I have to read too. So good thing that, I decided to shift and be able to get the best illumination, so I'm not struggling to read. And let me state that what I'm covering now in this conversation, this is part 2, from Colonials into a Confederate Union, part 2. This is what we're doing today. This is part of the W.A.G segment. Whenever was America great? And I know that would be a contradictory statement that a lot of people might feel uncomfortable with, but the reality of the words holds true to a lot of people that aren't of a specific background and have a more entitled history connected to their culture when it comes to being most agreeable citizens, recognized citizens within these states of America over the 249 years, because next year is 250. You know what I'm saying? So, and it's not to say that we don't like living here and being citizens and have an agreeable disagreement, amongst other people that share, more specific views. Because we're all different, you know what I'm saying? As much as we're the same, or, have a lot of same foundations, we're still all individuals and are not all 100% exactly in agreement with any other person. I mean, that's just not how it works realistically. It's a numbers game. You know what I'm saying? How many things are you into and other people are into, and those things will not 100% match? I mean, they could mostly match, but, there are some things that really aren't that important as far as the branches to the root of the tree of your foundation. But the thing about it is, to be able to adapt is a very important factor in being able to manage best through the manipulation of worldly affairs. You know what I'm saying? It's a Game of Thrones. And yeah, so I was stating, when we talk about America being great, it's not about, not, liking to live here and not, because being able to agree to disagree is what a democracy is all about. It's all about balance, you know what I'm saying? And without balance, you have chaos and dysfunction and confusion and a lot of entitlement as well as prejudice. Extreme conservatism is restriction, and extreme liberalism is about, the extreme freedoms, and everyone can't do everything that they want, within an existence of a lot of different people. There has to be boundaries, you know what I'm saying? And that's realistic. There has to be a sense of order within a lot of disorder. And I don't mean that word in a negative fashion. It just means that there are so many different variables when it comes to individuality amongst a whole group of people together. There has to be like a system, amongst all of this individuality that is agreeable. You know what I'm saying? So all of us should be able to exist and be agreeable within our few disagreements and specifically who we are. You know what I'm saying? So all that being said, you can't go back, Bob. And that's a reference from The Walking Dead. So, and the reason why I use that, and it's one of my favorite references, is because, what's already done is done. And what was done was really not that great. I mean, maybe to specific people, but we're talking about trying to make a lot of different people be able to be comfortable as opposed to a few specific a group or a circle, a specific circle of people only being comfortable for a lot of other people outside of that specific circle to be in extreme discomfort because this small circle chooses to control and be restricted in their empathy. They lack or choose to lack the agreement or the understanding of empathy. And there's a lot of, hypocrisy that's been lived within the history of these states of America. I mean, it's like I was thinking of soap operas. You know what I'm saying? You got Generations, As the World Turns, General Hospital, Days of Our Lives. I mean, all those old soap operas with all that drama and all that, political, egocentric, driven agendas and politics behind the scenes, you know what I'm saying? All that shadiness and, double standards and, two-faced activity. Like that's what this whole system's been about, and that's what it is now. And if my thing is, when you really dig deep into the rabbit hole, you really expose the full truth that it's been a long time thing that specific egocentric people continue to try to manipulate and maneuver their extreme beliefs into a system of power in order to minimize and use you for their greatest benefit and gain, as well as their selfish, their extreme selfish desires. So we were talking about this Declaration of Independence from when I ended the last conversation. And all this information is important, you know what I'm saying? And this may seem like we were back in school, but how much of us were paying attention back in school? And realistically, it's how you look at the information. It wasn't told to us to look at this like some soap opera story or, your favorite TV show or drama. It could be Dawson's Creek or Party of Five or ER or, whatever. Any one of these long-standing dramas or comedies, you know what I'm saying? This whole government system and this whole political game runs just like it. So we was talking about this Declaration of Independence because, the reality is these rich folks or people of entitlement here in the colonies really wanted to separate from Britain because, they wanted to cut out the middleman. And when it comes to the slavery thing, that was a whole nother thing with ending that transcontinental trade, and we're going to get to that later. But realistically, when you cut out the middleman, which were, all of these European ships, bringing these people from the African continent, over here into the Caribbean and, which wound up connecting over into the States and that, southeast area of these states of America, you know what I'm saying? Like, that was realistically, like, if you cut out the middleman, then we could control the profit solely, as far as these people. But we're not going to get all into that yet. So, like I said, from colonials into a Confederate Union. So we're covering, this so-called great man, Thomas Jefferson, this man of enlightenment and freedom and independence. And he's supposed to be, the main representative along with some others like George Washington, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin. You could roll the names off your tongue, you know what I'm saying? Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, these were the founding fathers. You know what I'm saying? But they only had their ideals in mind, not everybody's ideals, because, when it came to the poor folk, they were like, all we trying to do is, survive best and not really rock the boat because, we ain't really expected to have much of anything. All anyone ever gives us is propaganda promises, realistically. So I'm not gonna go too much into our what I was reading into, part one. But we're at this point where what they call the Sons of Liberty declared their by documentation their desire to be free and independent from being under the British control or being a territory of Britain. They wanted to be their own independent union or country. So we're pretty much at 1776, of course. So by this time, as governor of Virginia, Thomas Jefferson begins outlining new rules of law. And right now I'm just reading information, so, just bear with me and follow the story. Drafting a Virginia statute for religious freedom. Jefferson, being a man of enlightenment and not religion, emphasizes the separation of church and state. James Madison soon becomes a close assistant and ally. In 1779, Thomas is elected as one of 2 governors of the new Commonwealth of Virginia. In the ensuing months, New York City is captured easily. You know what I'm saying? Because now you have this Revolutionary War going on. So the British attacked that Northeast Harbor first, right around what we know as New England. So New York City is captured easily, with Boston and Philadelphia to follow. The British are moving south towards Virginia. You know what I'm saying? And New York City and Boston, like those territories were, more city. They were more city-like than Virginia. Virginia was pretty much very wealthy, but more suburban, in comparison to how we know things now. By 1779, 1780, British ships are being seen in distance outside North Virginia ports. On January 1st, 1881, the British invade Richmond. The Virginia government then flees west to Charlottesville, 5 miles from his Monticello estate. Because Thomas Jefferson, he had an estate that was given to him, through his heritage. He comes from a wealthy family of privilege, and his father died young, so he wound up inheriting his estate. His estate wound up purchasing more estate and settling into that estate along with also holding ownership of other estate. Jefferson writes to George Washington begging for assistance, you know what I'm saying? Because Jefferson is regarded as a great general, and he's still young. Pretty much, in his early mid adulthood at this point, maybe in his 30s somewhere, mid 30s. So anyway, well respected general. And he's also part of the resistance and the Sons of Liberty. And he needed his help. So he was like, yo, I need you to, roll down here because, we need to be able to hold fort, and I think we could do it best down here. In a tavern, the owner, Jack Jouet, or Jouet, if I'm correct, Jack Jouet, intercepts information, overhearing British troops about capturing Thomas Jefferson, because Thomas is a well-known person, an enemy of the Parliament, the British Parliament. You know what I'm saying? He's part of the Sons of Liberty, so, they looking to round up all these rebels. He rides 40 miles to warn Jefferson, who sends his family to his other estate at Lynchburg, Virginia. His slave, Martin Hemmings, stays behind at the estate to distract the British soldiers to Thomas's whereabouts. Thomas's cowardice will become frowned upon in his present by the public citizens. So at that present time, he wasn't really looked upon, as a respected guy because, he's a runner. Like, he's scared to fight. Like, he doesn't really have the prestige that George Washington does, but, he's very smart, intelligent, and well-schooled. On September 28, 1781, Yorktown is re-seized by George Washington and French allies, defeating the British General Cornwallis. Again, follow this story. It's like, as the world turns, All My Children, Days of Our Lives. It's a soap opera, because even back then, and as we go through this series of the Whenever Was America Great, there's always been some form of conflict, resistance, struggle, strife. So, depending on who's telling the story, you're going to get a lot of variations of what the actual truth is. You know what I'm saying? And there's a lot of propaganda within these stories of alleged truth. You know what I'm saying? But history is what it is in current time, and struggle pretty much backs the stories coming from the resistant mouths more than the entitled ones. So after the Yorktown victory, which was, a very forward, it was an important forward-moving victory at that moment, because they were losing a lot of these battles as the fight was going from the New England territories coming down south towards Virginia, and they wanted to pretty much hold fort. He begins working. So Thomas, in scrutiny, because he's considered a coward, doesn't run for re-election, because he knows he's not really popular. So he just kind of fades back and retires from politics, supposedly. But, he's still involved. He's a very, influential, business person and scholar. You know what I'm saying? He begins working on solidifying the building of his estate, his private home. And he wanted a setup to exclude, the clear sight of his property. He wanted it kind of masked and shaded. And that's because, him being this man of prestige didn't want to be so transparent that he was running this slave plantation operation thing. You know what I'm saying? This man of freedom was a hypocrite, and he was compromising what he was talking about by how he lived. He begins writing his notes on the state of Virginia, memoirs, thoughts. As many northern owners start emancipating their slaves, including close allies, families, and friends, or family and friends, Jefferson resists this man of freedom, expecting compliance from his plantation slaves. You know what I'm saying? Because the slave mentality is, yes, sir, yes, master. Like, I'm still loyal to you. You know what I'm saying? Unless it's forced, and it's known from a national rule of law that we're not tolerating this. You know what I'm saying? If it's loosely spoken, then, it's not going to be strictly practiced. You know what I'm saying? It's like a parent, not being very specific in how serious they are into their rules and regulations into raising their children. And citizens are like, children of the government, or, people that the government organizes, you know what I'm saying? Because there's, like we were saying that before, there's a lot of different ideals and views, and they have to be, a restriction or an order, an agreed order for everyone, a standard, a foundation. So in these notes that he's putting together, he writes first of his respect for the indigenous culture and their intelligence, but he slanders African Americans and their mental capacity in order to, follow instruction or to learn. So he labels, black folks inferior people of limited intelligence. Like he put this in his writings. In the fall of 1775, he and his wife lost an infant daughter. You know what I'm saying? Bad things happen to people that, aren't good to other people. And that wasn't something that was wished upon, or, is some form of humor. You know what I'm saying? It's an unfortunate reality that, bad things happen to people that don't treat other people well. A year later, his wife, she miscarries, and a few weeks after that, his mother dies. So he and his wife lost a young daughter, followed by a miscarriage, followed by his mother dying. His wife fortunately births 4 daughters afterwards before dying herself, early in her life in 1782. So he goes into depression, and his friends and colleagues convince him to accept the position to become an acting diplomat for the Union States in France. So he's supposed to represent, these Union States here in the colonies, to try to, at this beginning of this, American foundation. In May 1787, a Constitution Convention takes place. Not present are John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, who are both serving as diplomats overseas respectively. Adams in Britain and Jefferson in France. And this is post-Revolutionary War. So, they're trying to, really stitch their ties internationally, and, having some kind of international agreement and prestige and respect, because now, this is supposed to be a functioning independent nation or country. So, you have representatives, that are supposed to be out there trying to, sell your stock. In his absence, James Madison is granted the duty of blueprinting the Constitution. There has to be a foundation of written order for the people to follow, the citizens. Overseas, Jefferson sends a lot of references of literature to assist. You know what I'm saying? Because in the secret circle, they're like, as much as the public really doesn't like this guy, because he's a coward, like he's really smart and he knows how to write very well. So we need to utilize, his great talents, because he's going to be important for the foundation of this country. The message relay took 2 months each way. You know what I'm saying? It's not like today, of course, so information traveled slow. Jefferson is not enthused with the initial blueprint, feeling it falling short of preferred specifics of importance. Despite the blueprint, is signed in September 1787, but later ratified in 1791. Initially, only his oldest daughter, Martha, accompanies him to France. His daughter, Maria, eventually joins him as well after his youngest daughter, Lucy, dies from smallpox. She is accompanied to France by 14-year-old Sally Hemings, one of his slaves, you know what I'm saying, who was the daughter of his father's slave. And Sally's brother was also brought over. I was going to try to look back to his father's, who was the Betty. Betty was the mistress of his father. And Sally was one of Betty's children, if I'm correct. You know, so Thomas, of course, owned Betty through the estate. And, you know, they're eventually going to wind up having an affair. You know, so he brought Sally to France to, you know, tend to his personal needs and help with his kids because his wife already died. And, you know, his daughters he misses his kids, so they come over to France. And, you know, he brings a few of his slaves to help him with his home affairs while he's over there. Slavery was forbidden in France after the Enlightenment, you know what I'm saying? And Jefferson made it in his interest to hide that from his slave assistants. You know what I'm saying? Hypocrite, like I said, who could sue for their freedom in France, you know what I'm saying? And he knew that. But, you know, he's also manipulative too. As a founding father, you know, one of these great men. Slavery then is outlawed. They actually outlawed it, and it was written into their law in 1794 in France. Jefferson conceals his owning of slaves while he's in France, you know, because he got all these different. He's a political representative of the United States, and you know that reputation, you know, can't be too stained. So he got to kind of come clean in some sense in order for his reputation to be respected. At least, you know, be honest. And he knew that. So he figured he may as well just, you know, just be straight up. By the time Sally is 16, Jefferson begins seducing her, using lavish gifts in place of salary. You know what I'm saying? That's a pimp. That's a pimp move. So he winds up being a pimp. Thomas Jefferson did a pimp move, right? By the time Sally is 16 again, Jefferson begins seducing her by using lavish gifts in place of salary. She's supposed to be there as a servant and getting paid for her services for taking care of his kids. But now he's also utilizing her for his personal service. And then she becomes a mistress. Because he's a pimp now. They begin their sexual relationship somewhere between 1787 and 1789, despite a 30-year age difference. So he's like in his mid-40s. You know what I'm saying? And that's what these, you know, Republicans right now with this whole MAGA thing and pedophiles, you know, to bring that specific word up. But let's keep going. You know, we still have some more to cover in our reading. By 1789, France is going through their own revolution. This sets the framework of our rewritten Constitution. He witnesses the aristocracy of the French downfall. Marquis de Lafayette, who fought in alignment during our French Revolutionary War, along with Jefferson, chartered the rights to write a new French Constitution. So, yeah, right after the fall of Napoleon, they need to write another constitution, and Jefferson already, assisting in the writing of this American Constitution, is also writing the French Constitution. You know what I'm saying? I mean, he's good on his business. He got a lot of different talents alongside being a pimp. Jefferson, he misses America. He's ready to come back. But in the meantime, Sally, the mistress, realizes her freedom. So she don't really want to go, but, she's kind of obligated. So this conflict leads to Jefferson pleading. He begged her to come back to, the States, even though she'll be enslaved when she comes back to the States. She won't be respected as free. In France, she's free. She come back to the States, she's a slave again. An arrangement is made. He got to sell it. You know what I'm saying? He's desperate. He really like what she got going on, on the down low. So she basically demanded for her children to be granted freedom when they reach 21. Like if she goes back and stays with him, like she wanted all, her children, their children together to be free. But the other ones, it really was less about those other slaves and the children of them being together, finally being free. In September 9th, I typoed. In September 1789, they both return. She bears 6 children with Thomas Jefferson. The Duke of Rochefoucauld, on a visit, recounts an extreme amount of light-skinned African Americans within Monticello. So this very respected European man of influence is like, yo, something ain't right, with Thomas. I don't know, something ain't, jiving. Because all this stuff he talking on this side of his neck, the other side saying something totally different by his actions. His words and his actions don't match. Because I see something totally different going on. And it looks extremely suspicious. In April of 1789, George Washington became president. 13 years after, the Revolutionary War, United States finally has a president. He begs for Jefferson to become his Secretary of State, who thought about returning to France, soon after the election. Another Revolutionary War hero, Alexander Hamilton, is tabbed the Treasury Secretary. Hamilton and Jefferson feuded profusely, each believing that the ideal of the other is a prerequisite for a failed government. Like, that's what we got going on right now in current day. They was going through this from the beginning. So when was America great? Because they was beefing from the beginning, in the middle, and here we are now. So anyway, let's keep moving on. These two men grew up on the opposite sides of society. You know what I'm saying? Alexander Hamilton come from, a hard-working background, and Thomas Jefferson is a man of entitlement and privilege. Things were handed to him. You know what I'm saying? A compromise would have to be met for the displeasure for each to be worked through. The agreement came by Hamilton being allowed to set up his ideal central treasury system, this banking system, this money system, was centralized in New York City, because that's where Hamilton is based and where he's from. So this system, which was going to replicate the British banking system, was staying in New York City. Jefferson, who hated big cities, was allowed the request to move the capital from New York City to Virginia. And Washington, George Washington really didn't care, you know what I'm saying? Because he could travel and do what he wanted. He was like, yo, if you want the capital to be in D.C. so you're closer to these, more literal and legal affairs, because we all know Thomas Jefferson from part one, he has a legal background, and Hamilton was going to be dealing with finances. Just another long one, but this is how we do. Through this divide, the separate parties are formed. The Federalist Party, behind Hamilton, is built on merchant trade and national bank. He is most in alliance with Britain. The Federalists and British ideals are common. No different than right now, to me, the Republicans and, how the British kind of roll. The Democrats are more like French-based. And the Democratic Republic behind Jefferson follow a state of rights, strict interpretation of the Constitution and agriculture, right? That's basically, what the base of their responsibilities are leaning towards, So he is most in alliance with French ideals. But the responsibilities of the Democratic Republic follow, again, state rights, strict interpretation of the Constitution, and agriculture. Jefferson strenuously expresses his resistance to Hamilton, as Washington admires Hamilton as a fellow war hero. They're both veterans, you know what I'm saying? In 1793, Louis XVI is murdered during another revolution. Jefferson would like to assist in the French cause, but Hamilton, Adams, and Washington preach neutrality in the situation. Jefferson sees this as extreme alliance with Britain instead of respecting the French loyalty for their assistance to the colonies in the Revolutionary War. You know what I'm saying? Because realistically, certain people didn't have that much beef with the British. Like, they just didn't want that over excessive penalty monetarily that was being imposed by those taxes and the intolerable acts. You know what I'm saying? But there were certain people of entitlement and privilege more in those southern states that wanted complete freedom from, and I'm going to specifically put it out there, economic freedom from Britain. So Jefferson is mad. So he hires Philip Freneau, whose newspaper, the Gazette, operated as his state translator, publishing articles against government policies not agreeable to Jefferson. I mean, we see that now, with social media, with Truth Social and Fox, for this GOP. And that's just an explanation, using an example. There we go. So Washington, by this time, is voted into a second term. John Adams is his vice president. Jefferson is appointed Secretary of State, and Hamilton is still Treasury Secretary. But having such an extreme difference in the political beliefs in the Washington in the first administration, Jefferson retires again. Like, he got too much beef with, these Federalists, so he bows out again. After serving 2 terms, Washington decides to step away from leadership, setting up the beginning of a 2-term system that, Trump is trying to do something like the first, and it was actually signed into law later, But the example of this two-term began right after the inception, with the first president setting the precedent by only serving 2 terms and stepping away. So this was the beginning of a 2-term system and the first partisan election. You know what I'm saying? Where there was either or instead of a unilateral, because all these Sons of Liberty were together in, the revolution from British control, and they all agreed into their first system of government, but there was already beef inside of that system of government, and they were already split within that, unified system. So once that initial unified system, was done with, now, they working in a partisan against one another for to have a most percentage of control. It also minimizes the fear of a monarchy government. You know what I'm saying? So when Washington did that, that set the precedent that we are not going to follow a monarchy. We are going to have, a democratic system of government where we're able to freely re-elect or elect leaders within certain time periods. Adams signs the Alien and Sedition Acts in 1798. This act gave the POTUS authority to deport immigrants and arrest citizens he claims. Oh, hold up. I went too far. So Jefferson runs as a Democratic Republic against John Adams, the Federalist. Jefferson loses the election and relinquishes the VP role, which initially the loser of the election was supposed to be titled. So initially, the other party, the loser, was supposed to be the assistant under the winning party, but Jefferson knew that wasn't going to work. So, he decided to play sour. And like I was starting to read, Adams signs the Alien and Sedition Acts in 1798. And this act gave the POTUS authority to deport immigrants. This is all the way in 1798. And here we are in 2025. And look what this GOP has been doing. And arrest citizens, he claims, make false and malicious statements against the government. Adams is criticized and accused by the public citizens of tyranny against the democracy. So the same thing that's going on now was going on 200 and whatever years ago, and I'm not going to do the specific math. Jefferson is labeled an atheist, right? Of course, they just Trump was just calling that Afton lady hateful against Christianity, and that dude is not a everyday practicing Christian, or even going to church on Sundays every week, because we all know he's hanging out at the golf course. So let's not even talk about that hypocritical person that uses religion only as a platform for weaponry when needed. Adams is criticized and accused by, again, the public citizens of tyranny. And I said Jefferson is labeled an atheist, in that political propaganda game that his beliefs cater to the poor and supports political agendas of democracy, which, was most popular. But, to all those extreme conservatives, that was going to rub them the wrong way. So in the second ever election, there is much political propaganda, no different than now, right? Being promoted, you know what I'm saying? Because Jefferson's the extreme liberal, and, Adams is too conservative and rigid. Jefferson and Burr tie in the election of 1800. You know what I'm saying? Because in that system, it was a lot different. So you had like a couple of all the people that was under the Democratic Republic, and the main people under the Federalists, they all ran together. And whoever had the most votes, they were pretty much in order of victory. So Jefferson and Burr, the two Democratic Republicans, exceeded in the votes most, out of all the opponents in 1800. After 36 tries in 2 months, of there being this tie, because they tied. And as much as Hamilton didn't like Jefferson, he viewed Jefferson as the less of two evils, to say it like that. He saw him as less of a threat than Burr as far as, political agendas, and asked for Congress to back Jefferson instead of Burr. This is the first change of the presidential party. You know what I'm saying? So the first partisan was after Washington, and after Adams, we had the first actual change from one party to the other. John Adams bails on attending the inauguration because he's salty. During his inaugural address, he contradicts his long battle with Washington and his foreign policies. Jefferson was not regal in his presidency. So, Thomas Jefferson really was contradictory, in his beliefs and the things that he was connected to from his past with, George Washington. You know what I'm saying? But, for a political agenda and for, disguising his reputation, he's going to try to come off a specific type of way. So, I was saying, Jefferson was not legal or showy in his presidency. Unlike, the POTUS right now have the whole White House, like Liberace lived there. And that wasn't the way, people with a little bit more of a humility to say that, to give at least that much respect. He wasn't real flashy. And because of this, 2 years, because of his humbleness and not being very flashy, his popularity starts to rise because he starts to resonate with regular people, even though he comes from, a very entitled background. But, he comes off as just a regular person, so, he's, becoming more favorable with common people. They don't see him as stuck up, as, he was perceived to be. He establishes the first military academy, which is West Point. He also reversed controversial taxes and laws passed by the previous Federalist administration. He let the Alien and Sedition Acts expire. Rumors then start to surface about his secret life and personal relationship to his slaves. Political journalist James Callender, who was jailed by the Federalists for violating the Sedition Acts, was pardoned by Jefferson, right? Because, he was pardoned. He was considered, a political enemy, because of his, his news didn't agree, with the prior administration, so they labeled him, a traitor. And Callender wrote many articles speaking against the Federalists, which initially helped Jefferson. Jefferson declines Callender's request to be appointed a postmaster. Like, he wanted a favor. He's like, since I've been looking out for you, you have this position open, why don't you let me have it? And he's like, I think I'm going to go in another direction. So in September 1802, an article was written by James Callender exposing his relationship with his slave Sally Hemings. The story does not sink Jefferson as intended. Jefferson's strong resolve to ignore dramatic controversy strengthens the solidification of the First Amendment showing the POTUS can even be criticized without reprieve. And so since his ego wasn't so extreme, he was able to absorb that punch, you know what I'm saying? But despite, the propaganda, as true as it was used as a weapon, to try to minimize his power, because Buddy was salty that the favor was not passed forward for all of his loyalty, to state it like that. Since I was so loyal to you and, promoting your feelings and your agendas and your foundation, I figured that you would look out. But since you did that, I'm going to, try to stain your reputation because I'm salty. In 1801, Jefferson was the first POTUS to be inaugurated in Washington, D.C. The third president was the first to be inaugurated in Washington as the sitting president in the District of Columbia of Washington, being the capital. As it being the capital, he was the first president. In 1803, the Louisiana Territory, consisting of 800,000 square miles, becomes a focal point of interest. Initially, Napoleon had grand plans in the North American continent, but France's recent wars in Europe depleted the country's finances, which is now desperate for money. France sells the territory for $15,388 million today in comparison. Nowhere in the Constitution does it state the authority for the POTUS to solely agree to such a purchase. This territory intensifies the additional need for slave cotton labor. On May 14, 1804, Jefferson sends the now famous Lewis and Clark on a corpse discovery expedition, which included much assistance from the indigenous. Jefferson sees the indigenous as slightly superior in intelligence compared to African Americans, which we stated before. He already wrote that. It's documented in his own notes. He believes them to be easier to converting to their social favor, to their society favor towards defined Caucasian civility. Jefferson's views manipulate a supposed peace in adding additional territory with limited resistance. The government builds trading posts opposed to individually private-owned posts, predetermining a political advantage for land. A letter to William Henry Harrison expresses this precisely. Assimilation or annihilation. Either get down or lay down, from Benny Siegel and state property. Get down or lay down. Jefferson is reelected for a second term. In 1807, he orders an embargo to stay neutral from escalating war in Europe, mainly involving France and Britain. The economy begins to collapse, and the Federalist states threaten to abandon the Union. You know what I'm saying? Because they're like, if you don't compromise, the things that are gonna favor us or help keep us straight, we'll just secede from this union. By 1808, Southeast America houses the largest percentage of the world's wealthy. Despite the Northerners' desire for emancipation, abolition is not in the economic interest due to the growing recession. Slaves is big money. So why are you going to try to eliminate slavery when, it keeps us, highly sustainable financially? At the Constitutional Convention of 1787, Congress agrees to not outlaw transatlantic slave trading for 20 years. In 1806, Congress advances notice of the law which was given on January 1st, 1808 to the transcontinental traders. After the transatlantic abolition, domestic slave trading profit increases exponentially. You know what I'm saying? And we're going to get into that in another conversation at another time. So once they cut out the middleman, then they were able to centralize, the value and the worth of the slaves, because before they were, just consumers or purchasers. You know what I'm saying? But now they are actually manufacturers. So now that they're manufacturers, then the whole economic system flips and they become the controllers of the economic system when it comes to enslaving people. You know what I'm saying? Why give it up when it's keeping us in a strong financial state? You know what I'm saying? Because when we are able to, increase our labor and minimize the cost of the labor, then we are able to maximize our profit. When he retires in 1809, he begins to flounder financially. You know what I'm saying? Bad things happen to people that don't treat people good. In the War of 1812, the British burned the Library of Congress. Knowing that Jefferson was in financial trouble, his allies in Congress passed a law to purchase his private library content. Instead of alleviating his debt, he repurchases new copies of all his books, along with additional books with other frivolous novelties. I mean, that's a crackhead move for someone not in a time of crack. They knew that he was in debt. He owed a lot of money to a lot of other people. And because of his ego and his entitlement, once they gave him this money to pay off his debts, all these friends looking out for him, then this guy just decides, you know what? I'm just going to repurchase all the things that I lost, with this money. You know what I'm saying? Instead of paying my debts, in full, I'm going to just take this money and repurchase all my lavish preferences. The Panic of 1819 calls for the collection of his entire debt, including the ones he co-signed. So when he signed notes with other people, now they were on the hook for his debt as well, because, they're tied to his estate, being that they have an agreement with his estate, in legal signatures and agreements. He ended his life broken alone. The great Thomas Jefferson, broken alone. In the end. The end. This great man, broken alone. Contradictory. Really not authentic. And full of skepticism and untruths. Whenever was America great? You know what I'm saying? The writer of Declaration of Independence. Give us this freedom. This foundation that this government and this system, these political platforms and foundations, they scream about this this independence, and living beyond this declaration from that independence and how they're honoring that. But where truly was the honor when it didn't really hold full validity, because, the practices were contradictory to, the written statements that was instituted and voted into agreement and made law and foundation into what represents these states of America. This is your neighborhood sensei Fouché. First, strongly suggesting, let me say that again because it came out a little funny. First, strongly suggesting because a lot of folks don't like being told what to do. So in moving forward within conversation, I most emphatically implore for all of you beautiful, wonderful, self-loving, worthy individuals to stay woke. But in the process, never get all stressed out, you know what I'm saying? Make sure you take all necessary meditative practices and procedures, including environmental change, when and if necessary, to relax and always be prepared to take those notes. Be smooth in unity. 1.